The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan, presented by Sky Parker. The Feminine Mystique by Betty Friedan was revolutionary towards the feminism movement in the 1900s. Published in 1963, Friedan spoke for the housewives who didn't have a voice. To understand the importance of this book, one must understand what exactly the feminine mystique is. Coined by Betty Friedan, the feminine mystique relates to the idea that women must be fulfilled by the life of a housewife. Women were to be attuned to their femininity through the idea of serving their children and husbands. Society enforced this belief. I quote from the book, "The suburban housewife. She was the dream image of the young American woman and the envy, it was said, of women all over the world." Page 4. Society constantly forced women to question their femininity if they were not following societal norms. Hair color was even a qualification for womanhood. Ads, magazines, and newspapers all enforced a relation between femininity and being blonde. Friedan quotes a woman in the media. "If I only have one life, let me live it as a blonde." Page 3. One term she used to help further explain the harm of society was comfortable concentration camps. The life of a housewife forced women to give up any sense of personal identity. They existed solely to serve the men in their life and to teach their daughters the necessary skills to be feminine. Similarly, in concentration camps, prisoners were cut off from past adult interests. This widely was the cause of loss of identity, in addition to the dehumanizing acts of the Nazis. In American life, women were told to forego an education, for that would lead to an unhappy marriage. In addition, their hobbies were to only include cleaning the house and cooking, and nothing that may have given them a unique quality. Friedan states, "American women were not, of course, being ready for mass extermination, but they are suffering a slow death of the mind and spirit." Page 369. Friedan also states, "The Nazis decreed that women must once again be confined to their biological role. But this was not Nazi Germany. This was America. Why, then, does the image deny the world? Why does it limit woman to one passion, one role, one occupation?" Page 29. Lindsay Blake Churchill explains, by the early 1960s, the media had recognized that suburban women were often unhappy in their roles. Some attributed that unhappiness to education. They contended that the more educated a woman was, the more likely she was to be unfulfilled as a housewife. Magazine articles further suggested better ways to find fulfillment through sex. Whether it was pills, sex, or any other cure for the unfulfillment of being a housewife, no one seemed to suggest that maybe being a housewife was simply not enough to satisfy women. That maybe they should be given the same opportunities as men in living individual lives with their own identity. Essentially, the feminine mystique gave name to quote-unquote, "the problem that has no name," as her first chapter states. This feeling of unfulfillment invaded many women's lives. Without knowing such a feeling was universal, women found themselves wondering what was wrong with them, when in reality, the problem was with the expectations of society. This brings me to my next topic. What made the feminine mystique so influential? By giving a name to the problem that had no name, Friedan helped women understand that they were not alone in their dilemma of womanhood. By providing a sense of unity, women finally felt strong enough to rise up and speak their truth. It is said by many that the feminine mystique was one of the many catalysts for the second wave of feminism, by empowering women to stick up for themselves. I quote from the book, "For the first time in their history, women are becoming aware of an identity crisis in their own lives, a crisis which began many generations ago, has grown worse with each succeeding generation, and will not end until they or their daughters turn an unknown corner and make of themselves and their lives the new image that so many women now so desperately need." Page 80. Not only did Friedan provide women with the courage they needed to stand up, but she also spoke for the necessity of change. Friedan co-founded the National Organization for Women, aka NOW, in 1966. She became the first president of the organization and authored their mission statement: "To bring women into full participation in the mainstream of American society now, exercising all the privileges and responsibilities thereof in truly equal partnership with men." Betty Friedan pioneered the second wave of feminism through her leading role in politics and the influence of her book, The Feminine Mystique. Now, who was Betty Friedan, and why was she qualified to be the raging voice of feminism in the 60s? According to womenshistory.org, Friedan was a summa cum laude psychology graduate of Smith College in 1942, who spent a year on graduate fellowship to train as a psychologist at the University of California, Berkeley. Friedan was a very high-educated female, which may contribute to why she understood the feminine mystique so well. I said before, if a woman was highly educated, they were looked down upon, for their priorities did not lie with family. In addition to being a student and a graduate, Friedan was also a reporter and writer for multiple media outlets. Many of these outlets were politically organized, and some fought for labor and union issues. This being said, women's rights were not the only foothold Friedan had. Despite societal arguments, Friedan did marry in 1943 and had 3 children. But surprisingly for a time, she did not stop her work. Friedan knew firsthand the fulfillment of a working life. She could also attest to the fact that having a job did not impair her children's lives. She was living proof that a woman could be successful as a mother and have a satisfying life outside of the home. Regardless of her qualifications, Friedan's book has been called outdated by many. So here comes the question. Does it stand the test of time? In focusing solely on the life of a housewife, Friedan's work does not have as much relevance today as it did in the 1960s. This, however, is a triumph and not a failure, for it means there has been mass change in the world. Today, women have much more freedom in their roles in society. Most women have the privilege to work for their own living alongside men. However, the fight for women's rights is not over, for women are still being paid less than men for the same roles. Personally, I found the book very repetitive, but still this repetition was necessary for the time period in which it was published. Friedan was forced to reiterate similar ideas in every chapter in order to push the point towards the readers. This being said, The Feminine Mystique is an important piece of literature to study in women's history. This does not mean that it is completely applicable to modern-day feminism, but to understand the importance of feminism, one must understand its past. As said earlier, Friedan focuses solely on the life of the housewife, with the assumption that that is the only type of life a woman has, when truthfully, this only applied to middle or upper-class white women who were not forced to work to make ends meet. Therefore, it seems regardless of her recognition of the silenced housewife, Friedan failed to acknowledge the life of many other women who worked out of necessity. This failure signifies a further silence of those who did not meet Friedan's description of a housewife. They had jobs, so shouldn't they feel fulfilled according to Friedan's logic? This lack of awareness may not have been intentional, but it is still viewed as racist and classist. Less intellectual criticisms were that of men when the book was published. Many tried to insist that Friedan was advocating for the women to abandon their families, when in reality, Friedan was simply advocating for women to have the same opportunities as men. Overall, The Feminine Mystique is classified as a world classic for good reason. By writing this book, Friedan sparked a lot of activism in America for women's rights. She was widely influential not only in her writing, but also in her creation of the now. By reading The Feminine Mystique, I was provided with a valiant piece of women's history. I was able to immerse myself in the past realities that women have had to face, and I would not be able to do so without the iconic work of Betty Friedan.